Lin Feng left the Volt Wave domain. Even Supremacy Volt Wave, Supremacy Yellow Sky, and Supremacy Xianxia followed behind Lin Feng, flying towards the first Kiliacosm, the Void Devil domain. The ruler of the Void Devil domain was Emperor Void Devil. Although this Emperor Void Devil was not a one-star emperor, he had a celestial devil's true form of more than 9,000 layers. Relying on the Void Devil domain, Emperor Void Devil was also constantly trying to expand his faction and devour more world origin to condense more celestial devil's true form. According to the speed of Emperor Void Devil's expansion in 10,000 years, he probably had a chance of condensing 10,000 layers of the celestial devil's true form and becoming a one-star celestial devil emperor. However, when Lin Feng set his sights on the Void Devil domain, everything came to an end. Swoosh! Lin Feng flew directly into the Void Devil domain. With a sweep of his mental power, he easily investigated the entire Kiliacosm domain. He naturally knew where the celestial devil world in the Void Devil domain was. At this moment, Emperor Void Devil was in the celestial devil world, focused on using the world origin to condense the celestial devil's true form. The further he went, the greater the consumption for condensing every layer of celestial devil's true form. It was why one-star celestial devil emperors were so rare. They could not be found just anywhere. Devour! Lin Feng had almost no reservations as he directly allowed his internal Kiliacosm domain to descend. Boom! Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain descended instantly like a huge mouth, swallowing the celestial devil world in the Void Devil domain in one gulp. As for the Emperor Void Devil in the celestial devil world, in Lin Feng's eyes, someone who was not even a one-star celestial devil emperor was not even qualified for Lin Feng to take him seriously. Who is it? No, it's a one-star supremacy. Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain descended. Emperor Void Devil seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly raised his head, but he could only see the enormous Kiliacosm domain landing down hard. Emperor Void Devil unleashed his celestial devil's true form at full force. Over 8,000 layers of celestial devil's true form roared towards the sky like a giant. However, as the Kiliacosm domain enveloped him, Emperor Void Devil's celestial devil's true form was instantly crushed into dust like paper. The entire celestial devil world was also devoured by Lin Feng in an instant. The first Kiliacosm domain. Lin Feng stood with his hands behind his back. His tone was calm and indifferent, as if a mere celestial devil world was nothing. Only Supremacy Volt Wave, who was following behind Lin Feng, was incomparably shocked. Supremacy Yellow Sky and Supremacy Xianxia knew Lin Feng's strength, so they were not too surprised. However, Supremacy Volt Wave did not know. Seeing someone in person was far more stunning than hearing them by their reputation. No matter how famous Lin Feng was previously, he would only understand after meeting him personally. The reason Lin Feng asked Supremacy Volt Wave to follow him was actually to intimidate Supremacy Volt Wave as well. Everyone had an unspoken mutual understanding regarding such matters. In fact, he might even end up crushed into dust by Lin Feng, like Emperor Void Devil. After devouring the celestial devil world of the Void Devil domain, Lin Feng did not stop. Instead, he continued to head to the other Kiliacosm domains. His declaration of sweeping through 18 Kiliacosm domains was not just talk. Hence, the second, third, fourth, fifth, Lin Feng did not stay in any of the Kiliacosm domains for long. Whether there was a one-star emperor or not, it seemed to make no difference to Lin Feng. In fact, there was a one-star emperor with a total of 100,000 layers of celestial devil's true form in one of the Kiliacosm domains. He could be considered very powerful. Even Supremacy Volt Wave was far from his match. However, in front of Lin Feng, he was still like those other normal celestial devils, unable to fight back at all. The 100,000 layers of celestial devil's true form were instantly crushed into dust. And even the celestial devil world was directly devoured by Lin Feng into his internal Kiliacosm domain. Only at this moment did Supremacy Volt Wave clearly realize how terrifying Lin Feng's strength was. How was this a huge crocodile? It was clearly a giant dragon. In this shallow bay, no matter how strong the fish and shrimps were, how could they compare to a giant dragon? Lin Feng alone was enough to suppress any resistance in this area. 3 days. In just 3 days, Lin Feng had swept through all the celestial devil worlds in the 18 kiliocosm domains. Not only did it cause a huge reaction in these 18 kiliocosm domains, it even caused many people to feel a little dizzy, as if a heavy bomb had been thrown into the surrounding chaotic region. How terrifying were the celestial devils in the 18 kiliocosm domains he had swept through in 3 days. There was a 1-star celestial devil emperor among them, and there were not just nobodies. Due to various reasons, such as strength, restraint, and so on, the controllers could not expel these celestial devils. Instead, these celestial devils took the opportunity to occupy many kiliocosm domains. But now, this situation had already changed. The celestial devils in the 18 kiliocosm domains had been cleared out, which guaranteed the safety of dozens of kiliocosm domains. The alliance leader of the Domain Alliance is really terrifying. He swept through 18 kiliocosm domains at once. He's simply invincible. I heard that even a 1-star celestial devil emperor couldn't withstand a single strike from dark domain supremacy. Could the alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, dark domain supremacy, be the strongest person below 2-star entities? Heh, what do you know? It's rumored that even the ancient Emperor Strange was defeated by the dark domain supremacy. What are some ordinary 1-star emperors worth? But the Domain Alliance is not here to do good. The Domain Alliance has intervened forcefully. With these 18 kiliocosm domains as their base, they will probably integrate the entire region under the rule of the Domain Alliance. In the future, we won't be able to live so comfortably anymore. That's right. Although this area is very chaotic, it's precisely because of the chaos that we can take risks and have the chance to ascend to the top in a single step. However, the Domain Alliance will definitely enforce order. This situation won't appear again. Looks like we have to make plans as soon as possible. The Domain Alliance is very forceful. We can't fight them head-on. Lin Feng's invincible campaign sent a major gift to all the controllers. This major gift was indeed very significant, so much so that many controllers felt uncomfortable. Those controllers who liked to take risks and were opportunistic all understood the true goal of the Domain Alliance. Those controllers who were owners of a domain themselves were even more despondent. Lin Feng's action directly announced the arrival of the Domain Alliance, and it was unparalleled, like a ferocious dragon crossing a river. They could either choose to submit or disappear completely like those celestial devils. For a moment, the entire chaotic region seemed to have become less chaotic due to Lin Feng's actions. Be it the celestial devils or the controllers, both recognized the situation. Making an enemy of the Domain Alliance was tantamount to throwing an egg at a rock. It was meaningless. Hence, many controllers even took the initiative to apply to join the Domain Alliance and become members. In the blink of an eye, the Domain Alliance already controlled dozens of kiliocosm domains. It was not impossible to reach even hundreds of kiliocosm domains. Alliance leader, more than half of the factions in the chaotic region have compromised and are willing to join the Domain Alliance. That's right. It's not our Domain Alliance that's anxious now, but those controllers who are all eager to join the Domain Alliance. Otherwise, when our Domain Alliance army officially descends, everything will be reduced to ashes. The members of the Domain Alliance all appeared incomparably proud. Of course, pride was not complacency, let alone arrogance. It was heartfelt pride and satisfaction. These members of the Domain Alliance had all joined the Domain Alliance when the Domain Alliance was still weak and unknown. They could be considered old members. They had personally witnessed the rise of the Domain Alliance and how it had grown step by step to its current state. Now, it was able to truly intimidate hundreds of kiliocosm domains. With the entry of the Domain Alliance, many controller supremacies, represented by Supremacy Volt Wave, were convinced to join the Domain Alliance wholeheartedly. The power of the Domain Alliance expanded rapidly by several times. Its range of influence was an incomparably huge territory that spanned countless kiliocosm domains. There were truly more than 100 kiliocosm domains under its command, reaching 113. Lin Feng's gains from over 100 kiliocosm domains were naturally very generous. The amount of boundary stones each kiliocosm domain plundered varied, but he obtained a total of 6 million boundary stones. These 6 million boundary stones meant the Kiliakosm domains had basically been plundered clean. They were the reserves of these Kiliakosm domains over the years. If he wanted to plunder them again, he might have to wait for hundreds or even thousands of years. Moreover, Lin Feng had devoured 18 celestial devil worlds and countless celestial devils, obtaining an infinite amount of world origin. Hence, he had enough world origin to grow worlds. Lin Feng did not hold back. He urgently needed to increase his strength now. Hence, after the 100 domains were slightly stabilized, he entered seclusion and devoured the 6 million boundary stones in one gulp. As one world after another grew out of the chaotic lotus, Lin Feng's strength skyrocketed rapidly. Soon, he had reached 20 million worlds. 6 million boundary stones had brought Lin Feng about 7 million worlds. Including the previous 13 million worlds, Lin Feng had reached a total of 20 million worlds. Even Emperor Strange back then, who had cultivated for billions of years, had all kinds of fortuitous encounters, and even made a name for himself, had not reached 20 million layers of Celestial Devil's true form. This was enough to show how powerful Lin Feng's current 20 million worlds were. However, the stronger Lin Feng became, the more he could sense the terror of a 2-star supremacy. After all, becoming a 2-star supremacy required at least 100 million worlds. How daunting was that power? Back when the Indefinite Sect Master attacked Lin Feng in his true form, Lin Feng had only caught a glimpse of it. Before he could even completely sense the strength of the Indefinite Sect Master, he had already activated the space-time imprint and escaped. He even had a feeling that if he ran a little slower, even with the space-time imprint, his life would probably be in danger. Even if the space-time imprint was activated, the power of a 2-star expert would be enough to kill Lin Feng in that brief moment. Hence, Lin Feng respected those 2-star entities even more. He also knew very well that he still had a long way to go before he could reach the level of a 2-star entity. I still have to continue expanding. Lin Feng knew that he had almost no bottleneck now. What really limited him was the number of boundary stones and the world origin. World origin was easy enough to obtain. Celestial devils were spread throughout the entire small Kiliakosm. However, not every Kiliakosm contained boundary stones. For some Kiliakosm domains with deep foundations, there might be a lot of boundary stones. However, no matter what, if Lin Feng wanted to obtain boundary stones, and a large number of them at that, he would have to continue expanding. Even those that were not conquered by the Domain Alliance all chose sides and joined other powerful factions. For example, the Opulent Lodge happened to be the faction that bordered the Domain Alliance the most now. Unknowingly, Lin Feng's Domain Alliance had already become a colossus. It had even become an opponent that even the Opulent Lodge had to take seriously. Of course, compared to the Opulent Lodge which had annexed the Indefinite Sect, the Domain Alliance was naturally far inferior. However, no matter what, it could not be denied that the scale of the Domain Alliance was indeed very powerful now, just like back when the Opulent Lodge had not annexed the Indefinite Sect. It was just that there was not a single 2-star entity presiding over it. Actually, back then, the Opulent Lodge did not have a 2-star supremacy either, but it had still expanded to the scale of 100 Kiliakosm domains. After the Opulent Lodge gained a foothold, and prepared to annex the Indefinite Sect, that Supremacy 7 treasures came through the Descension passage of the medium Kiliakosm to the Opulent Lodge to temporarily oversee it. A 2-star entity was rarely seen in the small Kiliakosm. Apart from the Opulent Lodge, there was another faction around the Domain Alliance at the moment called the First Light. This First Light was also a controller faction, and it was already very ancient. It basically did not participate in the expansion of the surrounding factions, but had always been working hard to expand to unfamiliar areas. For example, the Dark Domain was actually an unfamiliar region in the past. Some celestial devils had discovered it in advance and entered it. It was actually very dangerous to expand to unfamiliar regions, and the investment was huge. Of course, the gains were also very abundant. No one fought over unfamiliar areas. Once discovered, it would even be extremely profitable. The First Light was such a controller faction that had always been expanding towards unfamiliar areas. The strength of the First Light was also extraordinary. Its composition was very special. The Elder Council, composed of the 9 Supremacy Elders, had full authority to determine the direction of the First Light. Every one of these 9 Supremacy Elders had at least 10 million worlds. It was even rumored that the strongest individual was already very close to a 2-star supremacy. Once that strongest individual became a 2-star supremacy, the First Light would be different. There would even be a qualitative metamorphosis. The First Light did not engage in worldly conflicts, at least around the Opulent Lodge and the Domain Alliance. They had never clashed with the Domain Alliance and the Opulent Lodge. Instead, they were unknown and had always expanded in unfamiliar areas. Strictly speaking, the First Light was the true representative of the controllers and was working hard to expand the living space of the controllers. What the Domain Alliance did was actually engaging in internal strife to plunder and redistribute resources in the original Foundation. The Opulent Lodge and the First Light around the Domain Alliance were 2 major factions that the Domain Alliance could not easily provoke. The remaining direction pointed to the Uncharted region. The Uncharted region referred to a region that the controllers had yet to explore. It was blank. No one knew what was inside. They might keep expanding for hundreds or thousands of years without finding anything. Could it be that the Domain Alliance can only expand in the Uncharted region and try its luck? Lin Feng frowned. This outcome was not what he wanted. Alliance leader. The First Light has sent someone to seek an audience with you. Suddenly, Supremacy Autumn's voice came from outside the secret chamber of Lin Feng's cultivation. First Light. Lin Feng was slightly stunned and a little surprised. There had never been any movement from the First Light, and it had even been very silent. It was really strange for it to suddenly send someone to the Domain Alliance now. Lin Feng pondered for a moment. In the end, he decided to meet the people from the First Light and see why the First Light had come to find him. Get the visitor from the First Light to wait in the hall. By the way, who did the First Light send? Lin Feng walked out of the secret chamber and asked Supremacy Autumn. Alliance leader, the one who came from the First Light is Supremacy Profundity. He has another identity, the sect master of the Profundity sect. He has 13 kiliocosm domains under his command, and he himself is a powerful supremacy with 1 million worlds. In the First Light, he is second only to the 9 Supremacy Elders. Supremacy Profundity? All right, I'll meet him. Lin Feng nodded. He also roughly understood the situation of the First Light. The First Light did not have a strict governing system. Instead, it was relatively free and appeared a little like a large alliance. The 9 Supremacy Elders were great and powerful. They controlled all the resources of the First Light and decided the major matters of the First Light. These 9 Supremacy Elders each had their own faction behind them and also fought openly and covertly with each other. However, they were all engaged in a kind of benign competition. Despite their conflicts, they maintained a united front, at least on the surface. In Lin Feng's opinion, the system of the First Light was simply too rigid. It was simply a miracle that such a faction could still continue to exist and maintain its combat power. Of course, perhaps Lin Feng had not truly understood the First Light. What he saw were all superficial phenomena. There must be a special reason why the First Light could exist for so many years and still continue to expand its power slowly. Soon, Lin Feng arrived at the hall of the Domain Alliance. He sat high on the huge throne. An unfamiliar controller walked in from outside the hall. Profundity of First Light greets the Dark Domain Supremacy. Supremacy Profundity was a pale and beardless man who looked a little thin. However, no one dared to underestimate Supremacy Profundity. There seemed to be a terrifying power that could destroy worlds hidden in his body. In the Domain Alliance, apart from Lin Feng, likely no one was Supremacy Profundity's match. Lin Feng could not help but lament a little. This was Foundation. Although the Domain Alliance had expanded rapidly and appeared to be at its peak, it lacked a foundation. It was more like a deformed pavilion in the air. Lin Feng was the only high-end combatant who could suppress all. If Lin Feng disappeared one day, the Domain Alliance would probably fall apart immediately. It was unlike the Opulent Lodge and First Light. If they sent a member of their middle or upper ranks, they could defeat almost all the controllers of the Domain Alliance apart from Lin Feng. Of course, when Lin Feng established the Domain Alliance back then, it was actually to serve himself so that he could better find and plunder boundary stones. Hence, Lin Feng was rather satisfied with everything in the Domain Alliance now. As for Foundation, that required time. Even with Lin Feng's support, the number of experts in the Domain Alliance would not increase explosively, let alone give rise to powerful one-star supremacies like Supremacy Profundity, who had 1,000,000 worlds. The Domain Alliance could forget about nurturing a one-star supremacy with 1,000,000 worlds just by relying on its current foundation. However, even if the Domain Alliance was a castle in the air, even if the Domain Alliance was really a flash in the pan, even if the Domain Alliance lacked a foundation, so what? Lin Feng was the one behind its success or failure. As long as Lin Feng was around, no one would dare to underestimate the Domain Alliance. At least, Supremacy Profundity would not dare. Hence, Supremacy Profundity's attitude was very humble. Even though he was a powerful one-star supremacy with 1,000,000 worlds, he was still humble around Lin Feng and expressed his respect for Lin Feng. Supremacy Profundity, please take a seat. May I know why Supremacy Profundity is visiting our Domain Alliance? Lin Feng asked indifferently, his face expressionless. Supremacy Profundity then smiled and said, "Dark Domain Supremacy. Your Domain Alliance ascended to power forcefully and intimidated hundreds of domains with your power alone. It has already become one of the 3 major factions in this region. However, with all due respect, the path of expansion of the Domain Alliance has already reached its limit here. It can't expand anymore. Be it the Opulent Lodge or my First Light, I'm afraid both are colossuses that the Domain Alliance can't contend with now." Lin Feng's eyes narrowed slightly. Looking at the confident Supremacy Profundity, he gradually released the aura on his body. Immediately, Supremacy Profundity felt a heavy pressure. Just this aura made him feel vaguely suffocated, as if even his internal Kiliacosm domain could not circulate smoothly. As for his Kiliacosm domain rules, they were completely useless. Only then did Supremacy Profundity remember that this dark domain supremacy in front of him was truly someone with unparalleled ruthlessness, who killed decisively, established a faction from nothing, and intimidated hundreds of domains alone. It was said that even Emperor Strange had once been defeated by Lin Feng. Faced with such a ferocious individual, why was he still beating around the bush and exaggerating the danger the moment he came up? Lin Feng naturally would not be polite towards him. Supremacy Profundity, if you have anything to say, just say it. There's no need to beat around the bush. A sharp glint flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. He just needed to give Supremacy Profundity a warning. He believed that Supremacy Profundity would recognize the situation. So what if the Domain Alliance could not expand further? With Lin Feng around, the Domain Alliance was a colossus that no one could ignore. Supremacy Profundity did not dare to make subtle threats anymore. He could only state the purpose of his trip honestly. Dark Domain Supremacy. I am under the orders of one of the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light, Supremacy Magnum, to invite the Dark Domain Supremacy and the Domain Alliance under your command to join the First Light. You will become the 10th Supremacy Elder of the Supreme Elder Council. Supremacy Profundity's words shocked even Lin Feng. He did not expect Supremacy Profundity to have such a goal for this trip. They were going to let Lin Feng join the First Light and become one of the Supremacy Elders of the Supreme Council? No matter how one looked at it, this was a little ridiculous, like a farce. However, it just so happened that Supremacy Profundity had personally come. If such a supremacy with 1,000,000 worlds came to persuade him, it was definitely not a farce. Supremacy Profundity, what exactly is going on? Lin Feng frowned and asked bluntly. Supremacy Profundity could only smile weakly and say, Dark Domain Supremacy, actually, I just received the order from Supremacy Magnum and also found it a little unbelievable. However, Supremacy Magnum is definitely not joking and is very sincere. Supremacy Magnum even asked me to bring you a meeting gift. Supremacy Magnum said that once you see this meeting gift, you will definitely be interested in joining the First Light. Oh? What meeting gift? Lin Feng was a little curious. Why was Supremacy Magnum, whom he had never met before, so certain that he would be interested in joining the First Light? Dark domain supremacy, please take a look. Here are 1,000,000 boundary stones. There was a loud commotion. Supremacy Profundity took out 1,000,000 of boundary stones and piled them directly in the hall. It was an extremely impactful sight. Even though Lin Feng was used to seeing millions of boundary stones, Supremacy Magnum had casually offered 1,000,000 boundary stones as a meeting gift. This was the first time Lin Feng had seen such generosity. Seeing that Lin Feng was moved, Supremacy Profundity's order still echoed in his mind. Then, he gritted his teeth and said, "Dark Domain Supremacy. These boundary stones are just a meeting gift. If you agree to join the First Light, you can have as many boundary stones as you want. In fact, it's not impossible for you to obtain 10 or 100 times of this meeting gift." Boom. As soon as Supremacy Profundity finished speaking, shock surged through Lin Feng's mind. Can I really get as many as I want? Supremacy Profundity. Do you think I'm so easy to deceive? If not for the meeting gift of 1,000,000 boundary stones, he would have expelled Supremacy Profundity long ago. Supremacy Profundity also clearly knew that he could not convince Lin Feng alone, let alone persuade Lin Feng to make the decision to join the First Light. Hence, Supremacy Profundity said in a low voice, "Dark Domain Supremacy. I wasn't the one who proposed the conditions just now. Supremacy Magnum asked me to convey them. Supremacy Magnum invited you to the First Light to discuss things in detail. When the time comes, if you have any questions, Supremacy Magnum will answer them one by one." Oh? Go to the First Light. Lin Feng's eyes flickered, and he pondered for a moment. Supremacy Profundity did not rush him. Instead, he waited quietly for Lin Feng's decision. In reality, Lin Feng was discussing it through voice transmission with Supremacy Yellow Sky, Supremacy Xianxia, and Supremacy Volt Wave. Alliance Leader, I don't think Supremacy Profundity is spouting nonsense. According to our intelligence, he is indeed a capable subordinate of Supremacy Magnum. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him Supremacy Magnum's right-hand man. Alliance Leader, Supremacy Magnum is one of the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light. He's a heavyweight of the First Light. Since he sent Supremacy Profundity here to persuade you, he should at least be somewhat sincere. If Alliance Leader doesn't think that the First Light is dangerous, you can meet Supremacy Magnum and hear his suggestion. After all, the current expansion of our domain alliance has indeed reached a limit or a bottleneck. If there's no other way, it'll be difficult to expand further. These few one-star supremacies were all the strongest people in the domain alliance at the moment. They had broad horizons and extraordinary knowledge. They all agreed that Lin Feng should listen to Supremacy Magnum's opinion. Of course, the prerequisite was safety. This must not be a trap. If it was a trap, he had to be careful. However, Lin Feng was not worried that it was a trap. If it was really a trap, why would the First Light go through so much trouble? They could send the 9 elders over directly, and it would be very difficult for Lin Feng to resist. Why would they need to set any traps? Moreover, even if it was really a trap, Lin Feng would not be afraid. He carried the space-time imprints. As long as he did not encounter a terrifying power that could kill him with a single strike and render him unable to react, he had nothing to fear. All right, I'll go and meet Supremacy Magnum. Finally, Lin Feng spoke and agreed to Supremacy Profundity's request. A smile appeared on Supremacy Profundity's face. When are you preparing to set off, Dark Domain Supremacy? My elder is already prepared to welcome you at any time. There's no need to prepare. We can set off now. Lin Feng did not delay any longer. Why would he need to make any preparations? Now that the entire domain alliance was on track, there was no need for him, the alliance leader, to worry about anything at all. Everything was naturally managed by the various alliance deputy leaders. Moreover, Lin Feng also wanted to see what Supremacy Magnum's goal was. Hence, Lin Feng followed behind Supremacy Profundity and left the domain alliance. Hence, Supremacy Profundity was very fast. However, no matter how fast he was, he could not be faster than Lin Feng. Lin Feng had a total of 20 million worlds now. Even if he only used a little of the worlds, his power would still be earth-shattering. If he wanted to, he could lose Supremacy Profundity in an instant. We're here. Supremacy Profundity paused for a moment. Lin Feng also saw the Kiliacosm domains in front of him. They were completely different from the Kiliacosm domains under the Domain Alliance. This was the First Light. The First Light had always been very mysterious. Although it seemed to be a loose alliance, it was very ancient, and its history was even longer than the Opulent Lodge. The Opulent Lodge had also descended into this small Kiliacosm from the medium Kiliacosm back then. Strictly speaking, they were all outsiders. The Opulent Lodge, the Primordial Lodge, and so on were all outsiders. They were major factions in the medium Kiliacosm that had descended to the small Kiliacosm in order to plunder all kinds of resources. The First Light and the Domain Alliance were natives born and bred here. They were living beings born this small Kiliacosm that attained success in cultivation. Which Supremacy Elder under the First Light does this faction belong to? Lin Feng suddenly asked. He was not completely ignorant about the First Light. At the very least, he knew that the First Light was not as united as it appeared on the surface. As it had a long history, various factional conflicts occurred, and the relationships between the factions were very complicated. Dark Domain Supremacy. This faction belongs to Supremacy Prime Glory of the First Light. Supremacy Prime Glory? Supremacy Profundity did not seem willing to say anything else. He fell silent and sped up. Swoosh. At this moment, a powerful mental power fluctuation swept across Lin Feng and Supremacy Profundity. Lin Feng frowned. Scanning someone with mental power directly was actually very rude and provocative. He was the dignified alliance leader of the Domain Alliance. When had he ever been treated this way? Boom! At this moment, two mighty forces of Kiliacosm domains descended. Two powerful one-star supremacies appeared in front of Lin Feng and Supremacy Profundity. These two controllers seemed to have 1,000,000 worlds each, and were not inferior to Supremacy Profundity at all. This could not help but make Lin Feng's heart skip a beat. The foundation of the First Light was far more terrifying than he had imagined. There seemed to be many one-star supremacies with 1,000,000 worlds. He had learned back at the Opulent Lodge that there was only one supremacy in the Opulent Lodge who had reached more than 1,000,000 worlds. There were also only two such tutelaries in the Indefinite Sect. But now, 3 one-star supremacies with 1,000,000 worlds had casually appeared in the First Light. As expected of the largest faction with the longest history and an extremely deep foundation. In terms of top combat power, they were only slightly inferior to the Opulent Lodge and the Indefinite Sect. However, in terms of overall strength, they were actually stronger than the Indefinite Sect and the Opulent Lodge combined. Supremacy Profundity, the person you brought doesn't seem to be a controller of the First Light, right? As expected, Supremacy Profundity frowned and said coldly, "Why? Can't I bring a controller into the First Light? Moreover, I was under Elder Magnum's order to specially bring this supremacy here. Do you dare to disobey Elder Magnum's orders?" With that, Supremacy Profundity took out a token. It emitted an overwhelming aura. Even though it was only a token, there was an extremely strong sense of oppression. It was the token of Supremacy Magnum. Only Supremacy Elders possessed such a token, and it could not be forged. Just the pressure it emitted was not something ordinary controllers could create. When the two of them saw Supremacy Magnum's token, their expressions became uncertain. In the end, they still cupped their hands slightly and said, "We naturally don't dare to disobey Elder Magnum's order. However, Supremacy Profundity, this is the jurisdiction of Supremacy Prime Glory. You're being a little too impudent." Humph! Supremacy Profundity ignored the two of them and left quickly with Lin Feng. This person is a little unfamiliar, but his aura is not weak. Even though he did not specially release his aura, he can easily resist our aura and even ignore it. He must have at least 1,000,000 worlds, and is definitely not a nobody. Supremacy Magnum is plotting something recently. We have to stay on guard. Let's send this news to Supremacy Prime Glory. The two of them discussed for a while, and finally decided to report this news to Supremacy Prime Glory. Currently, there seemed to be a conflict between the 9 Supremacy Elders, and it was deep. They had no choice but to take sides. They had joined the First Light under the command of Supremacy Prime Glory, so they were naturally branded as such and could not escape. They could only hope that Supremacy Prime Glory could gain the upper hand, and even completely suppress the other Supremacy Elders. Elder Prime Glory, we intercepted Supremacy Profundity under Elder Magnum just now. He brought an unfamiliar controller with him. It's suspected to be a one-star Supremacy expert with 1,000,000 worlds. The two of them reported the detailed information to Supremacy Prime Glory. Supremacy Prime Glory held a walking stick in his hand. He looked old, but in reality he was an ancient entity that had cultivated for billions of years. He was also one of the 3 elders who founded the First Light back then, and his qualifications in the First Light could be traced back to a very long time ago. Huh? This person... Elder Prime Glory read the information sent by the 2 supremacies under his command carefully. When he saw Lin Feng behind Supremacy Profundity, his gaze suddenly focused. Insight flashed through his mind, like a bolt of lightning cutting through the night. Is this the Alliance leader of the Domain Alliance who rose to fame recently, the Dark Domain Supremacy, Lin Feng? Others might not know the movements of the outside world, but how could Elder Prime Glory not know? As one of the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light, and a heavyweight, he naturally knew the surrounding factions of the First Light like the back of his hand. Right now, the one in the limelight was undoubtedly the Alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, the Dark Domain Supremacy, Lin Feng. Not only had his faction quickly risen to become a juggernaut faction, the 3rd greatest faction after the Opulent Lodge and the First Light, he had even defeated Emperor Strange before. Just this battle record was enough to attract the attention of the 9 Supremacy Elders. Hence, news and intelligence about Lin Feng had long been delivered to the 9 Supremacy Elders. Seeing Lin Feng, Elder Prime Glory's expression gradually darkened. Supremacy Magnum, you're really ruthless. You actually led a wolf into the house. I hope you're not too foolish. How can this Lin Feng be so easily satisfied? Humph, the First Light must not be destroyed by you. This is my hard work. Elder Prime Glory seemed to have made a decision, and a sharp glint flashed across his eyes. Lin Feng followed behind Supremacy Profundity. Actually, he had been thinking about what had happened just now. Those 2 one-star supremacies seemed to be deliberately embarrassing Supremacy Profundity and deterring him. The 2 supremacies represented one of the 9 Supremacy Elders, Supremacy Prime Glory. Behind Supremacy Profundity was Supremacy Magnum. The meaning behind this was intriguing. Clearly, the First Light was not at peace. In fact, the conflict between the 9 Supremacy Elders had already reached an irreconcilable level. This was a quagmire. Even Lin Feng had to treat the situation seriously before thinking things through. If he was not careful, he might be dragged into the quagmire. Then, he would not be able to get out of it. The gains would not make up for the losses. Supremacy Profundity flew for a while. Only when an unfamiliar Kiliacosm domain appeared in front of them did he heave a sigh of relief, and his expression relaxed. Dark Domain Supremacy, I'm really sorry about what happened just now. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. Supremacy Profundity also knew that Lin Feng had probably guessed some of the situation, but he was also very helpless. The current situation of the First Light was indeed that tense. Is this the faction under Supremacy Magnum? Lin Feng saw that Supremacy Profundity seemed to be very nervous along the way, as if he was up against a formidable enemy. He did have some guesses in his heart. These places all belonged to the First Light, yet after entering the First Light, Supremacy Profundity was so nervous. It was enough to see how serious the conflict between the 9 Supremacy Elders in the First Light was. Although it was a quagmire, it did not mean that there were no opportunities in a quagmire. Perhaps this was an opportunity for the Domain Alliance. That's right. This is the faction under Elder Magnum command. It's very safe here. I'll inform the Elder now and take you straight to him. All right? I'll follow all of Supremacy Magnum's arrangements. Lin Feng did not say anything else and continued to follow behind Supremacy Profundity. Not long after, they arrived at a magnificent and massive Kiliacosm domain. This Kiliacosm domain was larger than any Kiliacosm Lin Feng had ever seen. The lifeforms inside were also very miraculous, and seemed to be giants. Be it the architectural style or cultivation style, They all took the path of learning strength techniques. They appeared very unique. Supremacy Profundity also introduced Dark Domain Supremacy. This kiliocosm domain is the giant kiliocosm domain. As the name implies, this kiliocosm domain has all kinds of worlds, but the living beings in them are all incomparably huge, and their strength is domineering. Back then, Elder Magnum took a fancy to the kiliocosm domain and modified this place into his residence. Elder Magnum is waiting for the supremacy in the palace hall. Lin Feng followed Supremacy Profundity and leaped through one after another world. Finally, he arrived at the world in the center. There was a magnificent palace inside, splendorous and filled with a holy aura. Lin Feng sensed for a moment and could sense a majestic aura like a mountain in the palace. It was incomparably heavy, ancient, and vast. He was not inferior to Lin Feng at all. In fact, to a certain extent, his aura was slightly stronger than Lin Feng's. Supremacy Magnum. Lin Feng immediately realized the identity of the person with that powerful aura in the palace. It was Supremacy Magnum, one of the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light, a leading entity. Supremacy Profundity stood respectfully in the hall. He lowered his head and bowed. Elder, the Dark Domain Supremacy has already arrived. However, we encountered people under Elder Prime Glory's command on the way, and were delayed for a while. Lin Feng looked up at Supremacy Magnum. The other party was also an old man, but he had white hair and a youthful appearance, and his spirit was hale and hearty. In particular, there was a faint, dazzling light behind him. It seemed to be the power of the kiliocosm domain, like a raging flame, but it also made one feel as warm as the sun. However, no matter how Supremacy Magnum's aura was like, Lin Feng was unaffected. Supremacy Prime Glory? Don't worry about him. The Dark Domain Supremacy is the distinguished guest. I'm also deeply honored that the Dark Domain Supremacy is willing to visit the First Light. Supremacy Magnum's tone was cordial, as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for many years. No one could find it in their heart to resent him at all. Supremacy Magnum, you're too kind. I'm a straightforward person who likes to speak frankly. Since I've already arrived at First Light and met Supremacy Magnum, why did Supremacy invite me? Supremacy Magnum's eyes narrowed slightly. Although Lin Feng's tone was aggressive and a little impolite, he was not angry at all. Instead, he replied with a smile, "Is the goal important? I think the goal is not important. What's important is what we can obtain after achieving our goal. This is the most important thing. If the Dark Domain Supremacy can agree to join the First Light and join forces with me, boundary stones will be inexhaustible to you. What do you think of my suggestion, Dark Domain Supremacy?" There was no aggressiveness in Supremacy Magnum's voice, nor was there even any domineeringness. It seemed to be just an ordinary statement, but these ordinary words made Lin Feng's emotions surge, and he could not calm down for a long while. Inexhaustible. What arrogance. I don't believe that there are really so many boundary stones. After all, Supremacy Magnum's words were too shocking and unbelievable. Even if the First Light had a deep foundation, what was it compared to the Opulent Lodge? What was it compared to the Indefinite Sect? Lin Feng had almost emptied out the Opulent Lodge and the Indefinite Sect's supplies of boundary stones, and only attained more than 10 million worlds. How could the First Light have an inexhaustible supply of boundary stones? Supremacy Magnum shook his head and heaved a long sigh. Dark Domain Supremacy. How much do you know about the First Light? I don't know much. The First Light seems to have always kept a very low profile. Lin Feng pondered for a moment and said, this was the truth. The First Light had always kept a low profile. Lin Feng only knew that the First Light was a colossus. It usually did not fight with the factions of other celestial devils or controllers. Instead, it had always tried its best to expand towards unknown regions in silence. That's right. The First Light had always kept a low profile. However, do you know that just the kiliocosm domains under my command have reached a total of 100? The total number of kiliocosm domains under the 9 Supremacy Elders has already exceeded 1,000. Supremacy Magnum gave an incomparably shocking number. Even Lin Feng's expression could not help but change drastically. Impossible. How can the first light have 1,000 kiliacosm domains? Even the opulent lodge and the indefinite sect combined only have close to 200 kiliacosm domains. Lin Feng could not believe this number. 1,000 kiliacosm domains. What kind of concept was this? Even the opulent lodge and the indefinite sect combined could not possibly have such a terrifying number of kiliacosm domains. Heh! You don't believe it? A trace of confidence appeared on Supremacy Magnum's face as he said in a low voice, "How can the opulent lodge and the indefinite sect compare to the foundation of the first light? The opulent lodge is an outsider, and the first light is composed of cultivators in this small kiliacosm. Back when the opulent lodge descended in this small kiliacosm, the first light was already a colossus. Over time, the wealth in the first light has reached all kinds of incredible levels. Even I, one of the 9 Supremacy Elders, do not know the exact details. However, I'm certain that the 9 Supremacies must have collected at least 10 million boundary stones over the years, or even more." Supremacy Magnum's words overwhelmed Lin Feng with emotions. He finally believed it somewhat. 10 million boundary stones. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Since Supremacy Magnum dared to claim such, it meant that there was more than 10 million in Supremacy Magnum's possession alone. This was the case for one of the 9 Supremacy Elders, Supremacy Magnum, who was not one of the founders of the First Light, and was not too ancient. Then, along this vein, among the 9 Supremacies, the 3 founders of the First Light were entities older than many 2-star Supremacies. How many boundary stones must they have collected? In total, the 9 Supremacy Elders definitely had at least 100 million boundary stones. Before such a number, Lin Feng could not resist the temptation at all. Lin Feng's words were undoubtedly an indirect agreement. However, he was also very cautious, and was not arrogant enough to think that he was invincible now. In reality, Lin Feng would be lucky if he could deal with 1 or 2 of the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light, let alone the 9 Supremacy Elders. He wanted to know the true situation of the First Light. Supremacy Magnum smiled and said, "The situation in the First Light is very complicated. However, as long as the Dark Domain Supremacy agrees to become the 10th Supremacy Elder of the First Light, the situation won't be that bad." What exactly happened? Lin Feng continued to ask. He did not want to agree to Supremacy Magnum's request so carelessly. Supremacy Magnum heaved a long sigh and said, "Actually, perhaps neither of us is in the wrong. This matter is a long story. In the beginning, the First Light was jointly established by the 3 Supremacy Elders to form this model. Later, we joined the First Light one after another, and over time there came to be 9 Supremacy Elders. As the number of Supremacy Elders increased, while the First Light's power expanded, trouble also gradually arose. Currently, the strongest person in our First Light is Supremacy First Light. He has more than 96 million worlds, and is infinitely close to a 2-star supremacy. This is the limit of Supremacy First Light. As one of the 3 co-founders of the First Light back then, Supremacy First Light has a high status in the First Light. He is also the strongest, and we all place high hopes on him. We hope that Supremacy First Light can become the first 2-star supremacy of the First Light. Unfortunately, Supremacy First Light still has not become a 2-star supremacy. What stopped Supremacy First Light is not talent or resources. Actually, Supremacy First Light does not lack either. What he lacks is a 2-star boundary stone. In the beginning, the 9 Elders did not pay much attention to it. We felt that there's a long time ahead. With the First Light's ability to expand the unknown region, we may be able to discover a 2-star boundary stone in some unknown kiliacosm domains. As time passed, we discovered more and more kiliacosm domains. By now, we've reached thousands of kiliacosm domains, and we've already become a colossus. We've also discovered many high-quality boundary stones, and even some 1-star boundary stones. However, there's been no news of any 2-star boundary stone, and there's no sign of it at all. At this point, Supremacy Magnum smiled weakly at Lin Feng. Dark Domain Supremacy, you should understand now why the First Light has fallen into such a state, right? Lin Feng nodded and said, "It's for the sake of 2-star boundary stones?" "That's right, a 2-star boundary stone. What we want is actually just a hope. As time went by, Supremacy First Light felt that it was impossible for him to slowly wait until a 2-star boundary stone was discovered. Perhaps he would never be able to discover a 2-star boundary stone in his entire life. Hence, Supremacy First Light had another idea, especially with the appearance of the Opulent Lodge. You want to ask the Opulent Lodge for a 2-star boundary stone? Lin Feng understood at once. That's right. The Opulent Lodge is a huge faction that descended into the small kiliocosm from the medium kiliocosm. The First Light has always minded our own business and stayed in our own lane. We have always kept a respectful distance from other factions. However, only a faction like the Opulent Lodge may possess 2-star boundary stones. Hence, the Opulent Lodge proposed a condition. If the First Light is incorporated into the Opulent Lodge will bestow us 3 2-star boundary stones through the Descension passage from the medium world. Lin Feng's expression changed. He completely understood. 3 2-star boundary stones? What a cunning strategy. Since ancient times, instigating an internecine competition has been used to kill others. Now there's killing 9 supremacies with 3 stones. What a cunning strategy! Lin Feng sneered. No wonder the Opulent Lodge had not made a move after annexing the indefinite sect. Lin Feng had thought that the Opulent Lodge was wary of certain repercussions. Unexpectedly, the Opulent Lodge had always been plotting in secret. Once they annexed the First Light, how many times would the Opulent Lodge's power expand? At that time, even the Domain Alliance next to the Opulent Lodge would not have it easy. That's right. It's the strategy of instigating an internecine competition. There's only 3 2-star boundary stones, and we have the 9 Supremacy Elders. How should we divide them? At this point, Supremacy Magnum even had a murderous look on his face. Lin Feng understood now. The First Light had already completely divided. The 9 Supremacy Elders had become completely divided over 3 mere 2-star boundary stones, and were even at odds with each other. Lin Feng did not have a bottleneck, but he knew very well the feeling of being eager to break through after encountering a bottleneck. Supremacy Autumn, Supremacy Winter, and Supremacy Fura could not become 1-star supremacies now precisely because they did not have any 1-star boundary stones. Even though they were still some distance away from becoming 1-star supremacies, they were still very eager to obtain a 1-star boundary stone. This was already the case for Supremacy Autumn and Supremacy Winter, let alone those peak 1-star supremacies who were eager to become 2-star supremacies. 2-star boundary stones were very rare. At the very least, Lin Feng had almost never come across one. He had also obtained many kiliocosm domains. He had even plundered the indefinite sect, but he had never encountered a 2-star boundary stone. On the other hand, he had come across some 1-star boundary stones. 2-star boundary stones were rather rare even in small kiliocosms. Even the First Light, with such a deep foundation and such a long history, could not obtain a 2-star boundary stone. This was enough to show how difficult it was to obtain a 2-star boundary stone. However, the Opulent Lodge could casually offer 3 2-star boundary stones. This was not a matter of foundation, but because the Opulent Lodge headquarters was in the medium kiliocosm. Lin Feng did not know how the medium kiliocosm was stronger than the small kiliocosm, but the fact that the Opulent Lodge could easily offer 3 2-star boundary stones was enough to prove that the Opulent Lodge had the ability to offer more 2-star boundary stones. However, they only offered 3 of them. Their goal was naturally self-evident. Despite knowing that it was the Opulent Lodge's ploy, Supremacy First Light and the other supremacies could not refuse. That was the temptation of immediately becoming a 2-star supremacy. Who could resist it? In that case, it's the 6 supremacies, including Supremacy Magnum, contending against the other 3 supremacies, including Supremacy First Light? Lin Feng asked curiously. No, if the 6 of us can work together, it will be easy. The key is that Supremacy First Light has always been the strongest expert of the First Light. His influence in the First Light is very strong. Just Supremacy First Light alone has roped in 3 Supremacy Elders, including the other 2 Supremacy Elders. Supremacy First Light has a total of 5 Supremacy Elders on his side. On our side that's opposing them, there are only 4 Supremacy Elders. Supremacy Magnum said helplessly. It turned out that the number of people on Supremacy Magnum's side was even fewer than those on Supremacy First Light's. However, there was only a difference of one person. Lin Feng vaguely understood Supremacy Magnum's purpose of roping him in now. You want me to become one of the Supremacy Elders, and thus become one of you, so that 5 Supremacy Elders can contend against the 5 Supremacy Elders on Supremacy First Light's side? That's right, that's right. Once we have 5 Supremacy Elders on our side, Supremacy First Light's side won't be able to form an advantage in the Elder Council. As long as the 5 Supremacy Elders oppose the motion, they can forget about integrating the entire First Light into the Opulent Lodge. Lin Feng felt that this was a little too careless. Could the Elder Council alone stop them from joining the Opulent Lodge, just because the number of Ascenters didn't allow it? If Lin Feng were Supremacy First Light, he would definitely do this. Therefore, even if Supremacy First Light insists on doing things his own way, and leads the 5 Supremacy Elders to leave the First Light, they can take away only a very, very small portion of the forces under their command. The reason behind this is very complicated, and there are many interests entangled, but this is the characteristic of our First Light. The Opulent Lodge also knows very well. It is why they used 3 2-star boundary stones to divide us, and even turn us against each other, to ultimately achieve their goal. If only 5 supremacies like Supremacy First Light join them, and cannot even bring their forces away, the Opulent Lodge will not give them 2-star boundary stones. The Opulent Lodge wants the forces of the entire First Light, not just a few 1-star supremacies. I see. The system of the First Light is so unique. Then, once my domain alliance is integrated into the First Light, will it also become like this in the future? Will I be unable to take away my direct forces of the domain alliance with me? Lin Feng also thought of this. This won't happen within a short period of time. The Dark Domain Supremacy has absolute authority in the domain alliance. However, if it goes on for a long time, I'm afraid that's indeed the case. As time passes, the domain alliance will also completely integrate into the system of the First Light. At that time, if the Dark Domain Supremacy wants to leave, you can only take a very small fraction of people with you. Lin Feng frowned. Supremacy Magnum would not lie to him about such a thing. However, if that was really the case, things wouldn't be worth joining the First Light. In the end, he would not even have the domain alliance that he had single-handedly established. As if he knew Lin Feng's concerns, Supremacy Magnum smiled mysteriously and said, "Dark Domain Supremacy, what was your goal in establishing the domain alliance back then? Wasn't it to serve yourself better and collect resources like boundary stones? Once the domain alliance joins the First Light, your gains will not be reduced. On the contrary, it will increase greatly. The various resources of the First Light will be open to you. Moreover, the development bottleneck of the domain alliance will disappear from now on. This is killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It won't affect the interests of the many controllers and the Dark Domain Supremacy in the domain alliance." Lin Feng pondered for a long time. Finally, he slowly raised his head. "I agree, but on one condition." "What condition?" "Go ahead. After I joined the First Light, I couldn't interfere with the other supremacies. But the 4 Supremacy Elders on your side must give me all your boundary stones." This was Lin Feng's condition. He only had one goal from the beginning, and that was boundary stones. Lin Feng already knew how deep the foundation of the First Light was, and how wealthy the 9 Supremacy Elders were. Even if he just obtained the boundary stones of the 4 Supremacy Elders, it would definitely be beyond his imagination. However, Lin Feng still had to get Supremacy Magnum to agree to his condition. Lin Feng did not know if Supremacy Magnum could agree to it. However, he also knew that Supremacy Magnum no longer had a way out. Boundary stones? No problem. I can make the call and agree to it. Supremacy Magnum, I believe you, but the other 3 Supremacy Elders? Lin Feng frowned. Supremacy Magnum had agreed a little too readily, and it was even a little unreal. Lin Feng did not think that Supremacy Magnum could make the call for the other 3 Supremacy Elders. Haha, I know what you're thinking. Do you think I can't make the call for the other 3 supremacies? Actually, this matter is very simple. Roping you in was the joint decision of the 4 Supremacy Elders. Moreover, there are certain conditions set. Apart from certain bottom-line conditions, we can agree to everything else. Lin Feng understood now. He smiled weakly and said, "In that case, the condition I raised actually doesn't meet your bottom line. In fact, it's not worth mentioning at all to you." Haha, that's right. The conditions of the dark domain supremacy are indeed much easier than we imagined. It's just boundary stones. Although supremacy elders of the first light like us lack many things, the last thing we lack is resources. Hence, we can all satisfy your condition for boundary stones. I can even personally give you 4 million boundary stones first. In addition to the meeting gift of 1 million boundary stones previously, that will be a total of 5 million boundary stones. How about that? Supremacy Magnum was generous and took out another 4 million boundary stones. In addition to the previous 1 million boundary stones, that was a total of 5 million boundary stones. This was foundation. The foundation of the first light far exceeded Lin Feng's imagination. These supremacy elders were like gold mines, and their wealth was simply infinite. However, no amount of wealth could buy 2-star boundary stones, let alone the legendary 3-star boundary stone. If they could use this wealth to exchange for 2-star boundary stones, Lin Feng believed that these supremacy elders would agree without any hesitation. However, how could 2-star boundary stones be so easy to obtain? That was simply a priceless treasure. Lin Feng also deeply sensed the restriction the boundary stone imposed on controllers. Fortunately, he had not met other controllers so early back then. Otherwise, he would not have had the perseverance and courage to transform into a universe himself at all. Then, he might not have achieved what he had up until now, and would also be worrying over a boundary stone. Lin Feng took the 4 million boundary stones. He took a long look at Supremacy Magnum and nodded. Supremacy Magnum is indeed very sincere. I won't stand on ceremony. However, it won't be that easy to join the First Light and become the 10th Supremacy Elder, right? After all, it was a Supremacy Elder of the First Light who would wield great authority. How could it be so easy? That's right, it's indeed not that easy. However, with the recommendation and support of the 4 Supremacy Elders, it will be much easier for the Dark Domain Supremacy to join the First Light and become the 10th Supremacy Elder. Normally speaking, joining the First Light only requires the recommendation of 1 Supremacy Elder. However, to become a Supremacy Elder, unless someone has made great contributions or is very powerful, they must defeat one of the Supremacy Elders to become the new Supremacy Elder. Defeat a Supremacy Elder? Lin Feng frowned. There was a lot of room for maneuver. For example, if Supremacy First Light attacked, how could Lin Feng be a match for someone with more than 90 million worlds, and who was infinitely close to a 2-star Supremacy? Dark Domain Supremacy, don't worry. Supremacy First Light definitely can't attack. He's the strongest person in the First Light, so he can't attack casually. Moreover, this is the Supremacy Elder who was recommended to join. Wouldn't Supremacy First Light be breaking the rules if he attacks? Since Supremacy First Light doesn't attack, the one second only to Supremacy First Light is Supremacy Round Heart, also one of the 3 co-founders of First Light with 60 million worlds. However, Supremacy Round Heart is a supremacy on our side, so Supremacy Round Heart won't attack either. According to speculation, if Supremacy First Light side wants to stop the Dark Domain Supremacy from joining the First Light and becoming a Supremacy Elder, they will definitely ask Supremacy Prime Glory to attack. Supremacy Prime Glory is not too strong, but he is not weak either. He has about 23 million worlds. Supremacy Magnum stared intently at Lin Feng. Actually, they were not completely confident that Lin Feng could deal with Supremacy Prime Glory either. They had received intelligence on Lin Feng, and only knew that Lin Feng had once defeated the Emperor Strange. As one of the 3 co-founders of the First Light, Supremacy Prime Glory was not weak either. With 23 million worlds, he was ranked near the top among the 9 Supremacy Elders. Lin Feng pondered for a moment. In reality, he was calculating in his heart. If he wanted to deal with Supremacy Prime Glory, he definitely could not use the rules of time. After all, the 9 Supremacy Elders were all colossuses with over 20 million worlds. They were probably very sensitive to the rules of time, and could identify them at a glance. Lin Feng did not want to attract trouble. If he did not use the rules of time, He had exactly 20 million worlds now. It would not be a problem for him to contend with Supremacy Prime Glory. However, it would be very difficult to actually defeat Supremacy Prime Glory. Fortunately, there were still the boundary stones. Why? Does the Dark Domain Supremacy find it difficult? We also know that this is a little difficult, but this is our last chance, and the only way. If we can't defeat Supremacy Prime Glory, the first light will be finished in our hands. Supremacy Magnum frowned, and a trace of worry appeared on his face. It was indeed a little unreasonable to place their hopes on Lin Feng, and even a little desperate. However, there was nothing Supremacy Magnum and the others could do. Supremacy First Light and the others had the support of the Opulent Lodge, and were pressing on step by step. If they did not launch a counterattack, the First Light would be completely integrated into the Opulent Lodge. This was the last situation they wanted to see. It's indeed very difficult to defeat Supremacy Prime Glory, but it's not impossible. However, I need time, and the full support of all the supremacies. After a long while, Lin Feng finally raised his head and spoke slowly. Really? Ha ha ha, as long as the Dark Domain Supremacy can defeat Supremacy Prime Glory and become a Supremacy Elder of the First Light, feel free to state any conditions. The four of us will definitely support you wholeheartedly. In that case, I won't stand on ceremony. I need at least 100 years. In 100 years, I'll be more prepared. Moreover, I need world origin, a large amount of world origin. Lin Feng proposed the conditions. His goal was very simple. He would devour the boundary stones and grow a large number of worlds. Then, he would forcefully overwhelm Supremacy Prime Glory with his strength. 5 million boundary stones was already enough. As for world origin, with 4 Supremacy Elders with such immense wealth, why would Lin Feng need to worry? Under such circumstances, Lin Feng would feel a little regretful if he did not extort a huge sum. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. He felt that he had still underestimated the wealth of Supremacy Magnum and the others. They could casually offer 5 million portions of world origin. This was 5 million portions of world origin. He might not need a portion of world origin to grow one world for every boundary stone. Hence, 5 million portions of world origin was more than enough. In reality, Lin Feng only planned to ask for 2 or 3 million portions of world origin. However, he did not expect Supremacy Magnum to offer 5 million portions of world origin at once. As for shortening 100 years into 10 years, did this pose any difficulty for Lin Feng? He had grasped the rules of time, and his ability of time acceleration was even more terrifying. Forget about 10 years, even 1 year was actually enough. The reason he proposed 100 years was just to bargain. Now, he had achieved his goal, and what he received had far exceeded his imagination. Hence, Lin Feng did not hesitate anymore. He nodded directly and said, "All right, 10 years. No problem. Then it's a deal. I'll provide a secret cultivation chamber for the Dark Domain Supremacy to cultivate inside. The 5 million portions of world origin will be sent to your secret chamber soon. As for these 10 years, no matter what, we'll buy time. However, I hope the Dark Domain Supremacy won't disappoint us in 10 years. It's a deal," Lin Feng said firmly. He actually knew that if he did not successfully defeat Supremacy Prime Glory in 10 years, he would probably be in trouble. Even Supremacy Magnum and the others would attack and kill Lin Feng to vent their anger. This was not a mission that was completely free of danger. On the contrary, it was actually rather dangerous. The First Light was a dangerous place. Lin Feng had to be careful. However, if he did not take risks, how could he obtain such abundant resources? Hence, even if there were some risks, it was worth it. Hence, Lin Feng entered the secret chamber immediately. Soon, the 5 million portions of world origin were indeed delivered to the secret chamber. Everything was ready. Lin Feng did not hesitate anymore. He devoured all 5 million boundary stones into his internal Kiliacosm domain. Supremacy First Light, there's been a lot of movement on Supremacy Round Heart side recently. In particular, Supremacy Magnum has brought trouble back with them. They want to bring in the alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, the newly ascended Dark Domain Supremacy. Supremacy Prime Glory came to the hall. There were a total of 5 people inside. If any of the members of the First Light were here, they would definitely be very shocked because none of these 5 people were nobodies. They were the 5 Supremacy Elders of the First Light. Sometimes, these 5 Supremacy Elders could determine major matters of the entire First Light. Supremacy Round Heart. Supremacy First Light's expression was calm, as if he had already expected this. Why don't they understand my point of view? Those are 2-star boundary stones. Only by obtaining 2-star boundary stones can we possibly become 2-star supremacies. The First Light scale is too massive, and its foundation is too deep. It had already attracted the attention of some major factions like the Opulent Lodge. They are a pack of wolves, and our First Light is actually a flock of fat sheep. If we want to protect ourselves, we have to either be powerful, or join the pack completely and become a ferocious wolf ourselves. Supremacy First Light, Supremacy Round Heart has always said that we brought trouble back with us. Aren't they the ones who brought trouble back with them? How can that dark domain supremacy be so easy to deal with? I've investigated the Domain Alliance. They were able to expand rapidly in a short period of time. That's a bloody path of expansion they took. They've killed countless celestial devils and coerced countless controllers to obtain their current power. This dark domain supremacy Lin Feng has nefarious ambitions. We can't let Lin Feng join the First Light and become a supremacy elder. He was a purely self-serving person. His goal in following Supremacy First Light was very simple. It was for a 2-star boundary stone. As long as he could obtain a 2-star boundary stone, he could even do whatever it took. Whoever stopped him from obtaining a 2-star boundary stone was his enemy. Stop them? According to the rules of the First Light, any Supremacy Elder can recommend a controller to join the First Light. We can't stop them in this aspect, but if they want Lin Feng to become the 10th Supremacy Elder, they have to defeat one of the Supremacy Elders. As my identity is special, I can't attack. Among the 5 of us, you, Supremacy Prime Glory, are second only to me. When the time comes, you can attack Lin Feng. You must defeat Lin Feng and make Supremacy Round Heart and the others give up completely. Supremacy First Light immediately made the arrangements. However, Supremacy Prime Glory frowned and said, Supremacy Round Heart and the others know my strength very well. They should be able to guess how we're going to respond and know that I'll attack. However, they're still willing to let Lin Feng give it a try. Could that Lin Feng really be something special? Or be stronger than me? Even though Supremacy Prime Glory was very confident, he had investigated Lin Feng before. The speed at which his strength increased was too fast, so fast that it was a little strange and unusual. He had some reservations, and was afraid that they would fail unexpectedly. If they lost to Lin Feng, and Lin Feng became the 10th Supremacy Elder of the First Light, their previous preparations and various advantages would all be gone. How can Lin Feng be stronger than you? Lin Feng did defeat Emperor Strange, but so what? Emperor Strange is far inferior to you. There are many people among the 9 Supremacy Elders who can defeat Emperor Strange. Moreover, I've investigated. Lin Feng only barely managed to defeat Emperor Strange. Hence, according to speculation, his strength should be below 16 million worlds. Even if there's a discrepancy, 20 million worlds is the limit. Although Supremacy First Light said this, he was still a little insecure in the end. In particular, this was the final attack launched by Supremacy Round Heart and the others. He had to be fully prepared. Although the possibility of Lin Feng defeating you is minuscule, we can't rule out the possibility of Supremacy Round Heart and the others using special methods. How can we not be familiar with Supremacy Round Heart? He's the kind of person who would achieve his goal at all costs. He's capable of putting everything on the line. Hence, we have to make sure that nothing goes wrong. How about this? I can lend you the Radiant Moon Plate, the supreme treasure of the First Light, for the time being. The Radiant Moon Plate is the supreme treasure of the First Light, and has always been kept by me. It's the foundation of the First Light. If it's in my hands, even a 2-star supremacy won't be able to break through the defense of the Radiant Moon Plate. With the Radiant Moon Plate, you're undefeatable. It's impossible for Lin Feng to defeat you. Although doing so will make Supremacy Round Heart very angry, I hope he can understand my good intentions. Supremacy First Light muttered softly. Then, with a wave of his hand, a beam of light flew into the space between Supremacy Prime Glory's brows. Radiant Moon Plate! Supremacy Prime Glory was overjoyed. He knew very well what kind of treasure the Radiant Moon Plate was. It was the core and foundation of the entire First Light. Although it was only temporarily lent to him and he only had the right to use it, he could still unleash 70 to 80% of the power of the Radiant Moon Plate. Even with 70% to 80% of the power of the Radiant Moon Plate, he had nothing to fear from anyone. Hence, he was completely at ease. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. Even for ordinary controllers, a mere 10 years was just the time it took to close their eyes and catch a wink. To those top-notch controllers, that was even less of a big deal. It was only a blink of an eye. In the secret chamber, Lin Feng had already opened his eyes. In reality, as early as a year ago, all the boundary stones in his body had already been grown into worlds. A total of 7 million worlds had been grown from 5 million boundary stones. This meant that the quality of the boundary stones given by Supremacy Magnum this time was generally relatively high. In the past, Lin Feng had also obtained 5 million boundary stones, but they had only grown into 6 million worlds. But this time there were 7 million worlds. Having 27 million worlds is enough to deal with Supremacy Prime Glory. However, just in case, I still have to be careful. My greatest trump card is not the rules of time, but the space-time imprint. Lin Feng knew very well that this trip was actually risky for him. He was going deep in the lair of the First Light and directly intervening in the internal strife between the 9 Supremacy Elders of the First Light. If he was not careful, he might even encounter danger. After all, Supremacy First Light could certainly kill Lin Feng. He was infinitely close to a 2-star supremacy, and Lin Feng was far from his match. Lin Feng made use of the last year to study the space-time imprint again. He had mastered the rules of time and understood some of the mysteries of space-time. However, he still could not figure out the principle of the space-time imprint. It would take him some time to activate the space-time imprint. Even though the time was very short in front of an expert at the level of a 2-star supremacy, this little amount of time was enough to kill Lin Feng completely, preventing him from even having the chance to activate the space-time imprint. It was precisely because of this that Lin Feng was very clear-headed. He would not rely too much on the space-time imprint. Only by becoming powerful himself was he truly safe. Apart from studying the space-time imprint, Lin Feng was also studying the rules of time. He knew very well that the matter he was participating in this time was extremely dangerous. Just staying undefeated was far from enough. He had to ensure that he could defeat Supremacy Prime Glory so that he could successfully join the First Light. Staying undefeated and defeating his opponent were two completely different outcomes. The difficulty was also exponentially higher. If Supremacy Prime Glory was prepared, and even stayed on the defense the entire time, Lin Feng would have no chance at all. The difficulty of defeating Supremacy Prime Glory was exponentially higher. Hence, as a last resort, he had to use the rules of time. However, he had to ensure that it was not detected by the other Supremacy Elders. This was the troublesome part. Fortunately, Lin Feng had studied it for some time. The rules of time were invisible and very concealed. Apart from the target, as long as they were not used on a large scale, or the duration was very short, the process might be concealed from others. At worst, he would take that opportunity to kill Supremacy Prime Glory. I hope things won't get to that point, Lin Feng muttered softly. Boom. The door to the secret chamber opened, and Lin Feng walked out. Supremacy Magnum stood outside the secret chamber. Beside him were 3 imposing supremacies, all emitting an aura similar to that of Supremacy Magnum. In particular, there was an old man in the middle who was a little chubby. When he smiled, he looked very kindly, but the aura in his body was unfathomable like an abyss. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. Even with his current strength, he felt suppressed. Dark Domain Supremacy. How did it go? Supremacy Magnum hurriedly asked. Lin Feng nodded and said, Fortunately, I haven't failed my mission. If nothing unexpected happens, dealing with Supremacy Prime Glory shouldn't be too much of a problem. This was not that Lin Feng was bragging. It was indeed the case. If nothing unexpected happened, 27 million worlds would practically trounce 23 million worlds. By the way, who are these people? Lin Feng looked at the few supremacies beside him. Haha, I haven't introduced them yet. Dark Domain Supremacy. These are Supremacy Round Heart, Supremacy Dragon Universe, and Supremacy Ancient Path. Supremacy Magnum introduced them one by one. If Supremacy Magnum was included, these 4 supremacies would make for 4 Supremacy Elders of the First Light. In particular, Supremacy Round Heart had more than 60 million worlds. He was also one of the 3 co-founders of the First Light, a powerful Supremacy second only to Supremacy First Light. No wonder Lin Feng felt threatened. It turned out that the other party was Supremacy Round Heart. Although Lin Feng's strength had increased substantially, he was still somewhat inferior to a true heavyweight like Supremacy Round Heart. Greetings, Supremacies. Lin Feng also bowed slightly. He was neither servile nor overbearing, and maintained his own bearing. After all, his current identity was the Alliance leader of the Domain Alliance, and he held great authority, not inferior to any Supremacy Elder. Dark Domain Supremacy. There's no way out for us anymore. You're our only hope. Our ideals are different from Supremacy First Lights. If we want to stop Supremacy First Light, this is the only way. We can't let the First Light die at his hands. Supremacy Round Heart said meaningfully. He looked like a harmless and benign person, but Lin Feng understood that Supremacy Round Heart had definitely experienced bloodshed to get to where he was today. How could he be a harmless and benign person? I understand. I'll do my best. This promise from the Dark Domain Supremacy is enough. Let's go to the Parliament Hall and hold the Elder Council. Whether we succeed or fail will depend on this. Supremacy Round Heart was undoubtedly the backbone of the 4 Supremacy Elders. Their ideals were the same, and none of them was willing to allow the First Light to be completely integrated into the Opulent Lodge. For this reason, they were even willing to fall out with Supremacy First Light and resist him. However, Supremacy First Light was powerful, and clearly had the upper hand. Lin Feng could sense the determination of the 4 Supremacy Elders. He could not help but feel his heart skip a beat. He knew that neither the Boundary Stones nor the World Origin was that easy to obtain. If he wanted to obtain them securely and acquire more resources, he had to defeat Supremacy Prime Glory and join the First Light. Perhaps this battle would be even more dangerous than his battle with Emperor Strange back then. The 5 of them teleported through the void and quickly arrived at the council hall. There were not many people in this hall, which symbolized the greatest authority of the First Light. Only the 9 Supremacy Elders could enter the hall, and only those valued by the Supremacy Elders were temporarily granted permission to enter the council hall. Rumble. As Supremacy Round Heart and the other Elders arrived, the stone gate of the hall began to slowly rise. The Supreme Council of the First Light was conducted once more,